We'll now call up to speak Ekeminiabasi Eyita, and she's going to speak about the Nigerian experience of counterterrorism and collective security. Eki is very briefly a PhD candidate in international relations and Wits Carnegie Global Change Fellow at Wits University. She's also a sessional lecturer at the university.
Thank you very much, Naeem, for that introduction, and good day to you all. So as he's mentioned, my name is Ekeminiabasi Eyita, and I will be talking to you about collective security and counterterrorism, the Nigerian experience. Is this okay? Or do you want me to? All right. So as Hakeem has mentioned, terrorism is not just a Nigerian problem. It's actually an emerging threat in the continent, and it's something that we need to tackle, especially if we want to develop as a continent or meet our developmental goals together. And what we've seen or what we've noticed is that Boko Haram is a manifestation of this emerging threat in the continent, and not just Boko Haram, also the Lord's Resistance Army, as he mentioned, ISIS in Libya, Al-Shabaab, and what have you. Okay? So the growing number of such groups and the rate at which it's springing up tells me that the efforts we've put in so far as a country or as Nigeria on a national level, on a regional level, and a continental level has not done much, or I would say has had an impact, but has not been effective in dealing with the problem of terrorism on the continent. So this is the niche that collective security and collective counterterrorism initiatives seeks to fill if done properly. Okay? So what I'll do in my presentation is first of all talk about my key variables, which is collective security and counterterrorism, what they mean broadly, and what they mean in the context of Nigeria and Boko Haram and Nigeria within the Lake Chad Basin. And also go ahead to talk about how we have tried to deal with the issue of counterterrorism or terrorism in the continent and in Nigeria so far. Moving on, I will talk about the benefits of collective security, or I would say collective counterterrorism initiatives. What are the challenges we have so far, and what are the ways forward? Okay? So in terms of defining a variable, when we look at the concept of collective security, we are very familiar with the UN apparatus on what collective security is. And when we look at the definition of collective security, the key actors within collective security are often states. And there is no definition, I would say, or concrete definition that includes the involvement of non-state actors, like terrorist groups, for instance. So for the purpose of my presentation, I would define collective security as a body of state or a number of states and non-state actors coming together for the purpose of dealing with issues that are of threat to their peace and security, or peace and stability. In terms of counterterrorism, I would define counterterrorism as any action, political, military, diplomatic, financial, taken to counter or thwart efforts of terrorism. Now, the relationship between these two variables for me is that yes, they're two separate terms, but I think they're highly correlated. So I see counterterrorism as a subset of collective security for the purpose of my presentation. So hence, that's why I say collective counterterrorism initiatives. So for me, collective counterterrorism initiative is any collective efforts by state and non-state actors to thwart or fight terrorism, whether within the national level, the regional level, or at a continental level. All right, so what has been the Nigerian experience so far? I mean, I wouldn't go that much into detail since Hakeem has talked about it, but we're all very aware of the kidnapping of the Chibok girls, we're aware of the killings, the kidnappings that have been taking place in the country, marketplaces filled with civilians and military guys alike being bombed. So a number of lives have been lost so far since the existence of Boko Haram. What has our response been? Well, largely, response has always been unleash the military, send them into the region, and let them deal with the situation. So for me, that has had an impact, but has not been very effective, and I'll talk about reasons about that shortly. Now, when we look at the collective, Nigeria has been very hesitant to be proactive in the multinational joint task force in the Lake Chad Basin. So what it is, it's an organization formed by the Lake Chad Basin member states, which is Chad, Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, in an effort to deal with the Boko Haram problem in the region. And what we've seen is Nigeria, because of its territorial integrity, has been very hesitant to participate or be proactive in this group. However, it has been very involved in other initiatives, particularly in partnership with the United States of America. It's also an active member in the Trans-Sahara Counterterrorism Partnership. It's also had it was a joint fusion cell in collaboration with the DoD, which is the Department of Defense, the USAID, as well as the FBI. Right? So what you've seen so far is Nigeria being proactive in terms of bilateral relations with other states, especially with the United States, but not so proactive when it comes to the region where the problem is actually alive and kicking, I would say. All right, so what has it done nationally? Like I mentioned, it has used military tactics, often at times without strategy, without coordination, unleashed the military into the region to go deal with the problem. And we had reports where there were claims that the Nigerian military had actually killed a lot of people in comparison to Boko Haram in their attempt to deal with the Boko Haram problem, particularly in Borno State, in Yobe, in Gombe, in Adamawa State, in Bauchi as well. So these are some of the issues that Nigeria has seen so far in its bid to figure out a way to deal effectively with Boko Haram. Also, it called for a use of biometric data in terms of having an account on who goes in and who comes out of Nigeria, but that wasn't successful to a certain extent because the capacity to deal with this issue was very limited. All right, so let me talk about the importance of collective counter-terrorism initiative, but looking at it within the context of Nigeria. First of all, what it has done so far, especially with the help of the United States, is that Nigeria has been able to reclaim some territories from Boko Haram. So I'm not Hausa, so I may not be able to pronounce the name properly, but we've been able to reclaim Chibok, Damaturu, Goza, and some parts of Baga. But other parts like Gulak, Kwatama Dafa, and Bama and Madagali still remain under Boko Haram control. Also, what Collective Counter-Security Initiative does is division of labor, okay? So if perhaps we were very proactive in the multinational joint task force, what it would have done is allow for sharing of intelligence within the regions or the countries in the Lake Chad Basin so that each country has its own task to contribute in dealing with the issue, particularly because of our borders, they're very porous, and the Lake Chad there, which allows for ease of movement for these terrorist groups or militants. Also, collective security allows for cost effectiveness, like I said, sharing of intelligence and division of labor, as I've mentioned earlier, and change of tactics. So when you cooperate with other countries in dealing with the problem of Boko Haram, it allows for you to sit around a table, and decide or figure out what tactics or what has been the tactics so far, and how can we ensure that together or collectively we can, counter Boko Haram activities, particularly along the Lake Chad Basin region. Collective security also has the potential of precluding similar recurrences in the region. That is, as a collective, after strategizing on how you intend on dealing with a particular terrorist group within your territory, it allows for measures or policies or strategies in order to prevent the recurrence of such problems in the region. Those are the benefits of collective counterterrorism if done properly. So far, what challenges have we had? Well, we've had a problem of coordination, and that seems to be the key problem that Nigeria faces on the collective side. We don't have, like I said, our national strategy and our regional strategies are often diverse. It got to a point where At some point, Nigeria, like I said, was hesitant on allowing the multinational joint task force to operate in Nigeria, and Chad had to come in, Chadian army had to come into Nigeria, chasing Boko Haram terrorist groups, and actually was very successful in hunting down and destroying the Boko Haram terrorist camp in Baga. Okay, so we have a problem of collective, of coordination problem, where national strategies don't coordinate with regional strategies. Secondly, overlapping membership and overlapping mandates. Nigeria being a part of the Trans-Saharan Counterterrorism Partnership, part of the Multinational Joint Task Force, part of other initiatives, bilateral initiatives with the United States, don't have the ability to collect its resources or pool its resources and target it towards one initiative where you can say, okay, we're contributing this amount of army to the multinational joint task force, and this is how much we'll contribute, this is how much intelligence, how much technology we would put together to ensure that this particular initiative deals successfully with Boko Haram. So the overlapping membership and the overlapping mandate kind of allows for a divide and conquer and not a coordinated response to the Boko Haram problem. Okay? Secondly, Boko Haram, or tackling Boko Haram on a national level, has actually caused a rippling effect in the region. What do I mean? Now, when I look at security, collective security, let me just highlight, I'm looking at it not just as the Lake Chad Basin countries, I'm looking at it in terms of Nigeria partnering with other countries, one, Nigeria partnering with member states in the region as well. So looking at national initiative vis-a-vis collective security. That's the purpose of my presentation. Now, what Boko Haram or Nigerians' tactic has done so far is caused a rippling effect. So first of all, as he mentioned, Boko Haram was a Nigerian problem. And then because of the uncoordination of strategies with our military, it has now become a Lake Chad Basin problem. And it refusing for other countries in the Lake Chad Basin to become proactive in chasing the issue of Boko Haram doesn't quite make sense, because we could actually blame Nigeria for the problem in other member states in the Lake Chad Basin. Thirdly, collective security has allowed for Boko Haram to move from conventional warfare into adapting guerrilla warfare. So yes, national strategies and collective strategies alike have been able to reclaim territories from Boko Haram, move them away from epicenters or key cities and towns. But what it has done also is push them to the border, push them into the Zambezi forest, that they are now becoming guerrilla warfare. We've taken away territories from them, so we don't know exactly where they are. They are scattered all over the place, and that's what collective security has done, allowing Boko Haram to adapt into guerrilla warfare. Thirdly, socioeconomic issues. We have not been able to successfully pay our army, and we've had reports of armies, when there's a problem, running with the crowd or running ahead of the crowd. And collective security vis-a-vis Nigeria's ability to tackle Boko Haram could, if properly done well, allow for coordination, okay, in dealing with the Boko Haram problem, one, and also preventing or developing the socioeconomic development of the people within the region. So you don't just go in and attack and chase Boko Haram and then leave the people the way they are or the way you found them. There has to be something that has to be done, whether it's rehabilitation programs, whether it's food camps, that would help in developing the people within the territories where Boko Haram first operated. Another challenge we have is that we have very porous borders, and that has not played well in our favor as Nigeria, but has played well in the favor of terrorist groups, where the ease of movement between Nigeria and Chad and also the Lake Chad Basin allows for the ease of transportation of goods and services, even ammunition, in and out of Nigeria. Okay? Now, our military tactics, again, has also been insufficient, and we need to, like I said, adapt our military tactics and use it in coordination with other military tactics. So it's not about unleashing the army and getting them into the territory to deal with the issue of Boko Haram, which has been the strategy so far, but there has to be a change in how we utilize our military and maybe even use a soft power approach to dealing with the problem of Boko Haram. Thirdly, finally, what our challenge has been also is the problem of pride and the politics of big manism. So Nigeria, again, like I mentioned, has been reluctant to be proactive in the multinational joint task force and has considered Boko Haram as our internal matter. But like I said, it has had a rippling effect. It's not longer a Nigerian problem, but a Lake Chad Basin problem and a West African problem and a continental problem. So what we need, that has been a challenge to the effectiveness of how effective the multinational joint task force could be or can be in the region. So asking for help becomes a problem because it wants to maintain its superpower status in the region, and that is a challenge to the effects of collective security. Now, what can we do? How do we move on from this? I think, or I would say that negotiations would be one way. I mean, and I can see people frowning saying we don't negotiate with terrorists, but there is need to use a soft power approach, okay? Especially where terrorist groups or members of terrorist groups are being captured by our military. There is need to use them as a point of contact for negotiation or point of contact to get information about the functioning or how to take down the terrorist group. So it's not okay to just capture them and then kill them without attempting to find out more or use that leverage over Boko Haram. That's one. Secondly, as I mentioned, we need socio-economic empowerment. It's important that we empower the members or the locals of areas where Boko Haram or terrorist groups like that have been very operative. It's not okay to bomb and leave. And I'm sure you've also read about how we've had a lot of, I think, over 1 million internal displaced people moving from Nigeria to Chad or to Cameroon or to Niger. And it's important that we find a way or find mechanisms together on the collective to empower victims of Boko Haram or of terrorist groups such as this. Also, there is need for greater coordination among cooperating states, and that means there has to be communication, there has to be sharing of strategies. But then someone would argue military information is quite sensitive, so how much information do you share? But at this point, in the bid to deal with Boko Haram, I think privacy kind of falls apart when we talk about Boko Haram operating in the Lake Chad Basin region. Also, we need to find a way on the collective vis-a-vis our national efforts to curb the sources of funding of Boko Haram. And there's been rumors, I don't know how true this is, maybe Hakeem can validate that, that some of our politicians in the National Assembly also fund Boko Haram. I don't know how true that is, but if that is the case, then we have a huge problem on our hands, or Buhari has a huge problem on his hands, seeing that it's now his responsibility to tackle the issue of Boko Haram. But yes, there is need to curb the sources of funding of Boko Haram if we are to deal with this terrorist group effectively on a national vis-a-vis on a collective security level. Also, it's important that military tactics not just use conventional warfare, but also adapt their tactics to guerrilla warfare. Because there has been situations, especially in Baga, where Boko Haram goes into military camp and actually takes them down. And because our military has not been able to adapt its tactics to guerrilla warfare, it's actually an advantage for Boko Haram. So it's important that our military collectively and nationally adapt our combat tactics to guerrilla warfare. And what we've seen so far as well is that Nigeria has been utilizing retaliation tactics where you hear today that Boko Haram has bombed maybe Goza, and then the next thing we know, we're sending our military into Goza to go bomb and find Boko Haram members and take them down. That has been the strategy, that has been the policies so far. But retaliation politics does not work, and it hasn't worked so far. What do we need to do? Counterterrorism, yes, is a short-term goal, but it's also a medium to long-term goal. On the short term, we want to be able to stop the killings as fast as possible. But at the same time, we also want to strategize going forward on how we can prevent things like this from recurring, how we can prevent terrorist groups from reclaiming territories that we have already claimed from them. So this needs proper coordination, this needs proper planning, this needs communication between the militaries between in the Lake Chad Basin and not just Nigeria. Okay? Finally, I would say motivation is needed. We need to pay our military officers. We need to pay our soldiers. And like I said, there's been stories about soldiers even running ahead of the people they're supposed to protect. And given that they've made the sacrifices to protect the people where terrorist groups have been attacking them, but it's important that we motivate them as a country to do the work that, yes, they've pledged to do. We need to pay them. And someone would say that, Nigeria may not have, its coffers may be limited in its ability to do that. I beg to differ. I mean, according to Premium Times, in about 8 years so far, 55 politicians have stolen 1.34 trillion naira. And for me, that's enough to build our military capacity, to build our military arsenal, to get weaponries, and also enough change left to pay military guys. So in a nutshell, I think collective security or collective counterterrorism in Nigeria has had an impact, but has the potential to be effective with greater coordination, which seems to be the big problem we're facing in Nigeria as a player nationally and as a player within the Lake Chad Basin. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Eki.